Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. This week I've come to Yorkshire, home of the Yorkshire pudding, flat caps, and whilst I don't often drink tea, if I do, it's Yorkshire tea. There's some of the best scenery in the country here, and underneath it is a load of coal, which is useful to make steel, something they do rather well. Geez, calm down Yorkshire, that sounds like quite a list of good stuff. In the old days, Yorkshire was one massive county, the largest in England, and technically it still is, but it's now divided up into 4 smaller sections, mainly for administrative purposes, and I only point it out because there's no way we'd cover all of Yorkshire within a couple of videos, so it makes sense to treat Yorkshire as these 4 smaller sections, even though in the days of my guidebook they didn't exist. So we'll be starting with South Yorkshire and a journey from Sheffield to Barnsley. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period correct maps, and Sheffield's rather large, isn't it? In the days of my guidebook, there were over 490,000 people living here, and that's because Sheffield was an industrial giant, leading the way within the steel industry, with cast steel being created here in the 1740s, and everything produced thereafter was bloody excellent. In fact, it was the best in the world, and the reason why Sheffield became known as Steel City. In the 1750s, a blacksmith forge was set up right in the middle of Sheffield's industrial area, and it would later expand to become the River Don Works in 1865, owned by Vickers Limited, the same company that would go on to manufacture aircraft, amongst other things. There's been various company buyouts and mergers over the years, but surprisingly, today the steelworks is still operational, most likely because it's owned by the Ministry of Defence, and they've got the budget for it. Now known as Forge Masters, they make gun parts and Ministry of Defence things. Fun fact, the company got caught up in some controversy in the late 1980s after being commissioned to manufacture parts that would have been used to build a supergun capable of firing projectiles into orbit, which would then rain down death and destruction on your target of choice. Now, that may not have been a problem per se, but the customer was Saddam Hussein. Remember him? Also, the Canadian engineer who designed the supergun was assassinated in the 1990s, allegedly by the Israeli Special Forces, and I'll stop there because I'm probably being watched. Scene change, and my guidebook suggests maybe we'd like to visit Sheffield's Botanical Gardens, which couldn't be any more different from a horrible steelworks on an industrial estate. It's 19 acres of quiet land containing over 5,000 species of plants, and it also features some rather lovely glass pavilions or glass houses that today are Grade 2 listed structures. In the old days when visiting, one of the star attractions would have been Bruin the black bear, a black bear taken from the wild and chucked into a purpose-built enclosure solely for entertainment purposes. It was different times, although apparently he wasn't all that popular with visitors. Understandably, Bruin just moped about the place, shitting in the corner, and as early as 1840, complaints were raised, mostly about the bad smell. No one cared about the bear, and today the restored bear pit serves as a permanent reminder of how people are dicks. Okay, let's get this party started, and we're to head out of Sheffield now, which in the old days looked a lot easier. There were less roundabouts, but either way, the route along the A6178 is about the same. Rather than just take the most direct route to Barnsley, we'll be sort of looping around so that we're able to take in some of the delightful towns and cities found in the area. Speaking of which, here's one. Rotherham.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
It's a fairly large town that in the old days had around 68,000 residents, and like Sheffield, Rotherham is doing rather well within the steel industry, but the town's growth is mostly down to the coal mining industry, which had been around for a lot longer. But here's a bridge. As recommended by my guidebook, well, all it says is bridge, but I assume it means this one, known as Rotherham Bridge, which was constructed in 1483, and today it's a scheduled monument. It's unique in as much as it has a chapel built into the structure as part of the bridge, and it's said to be one of the finest preserved examples of the mark, but that's probably because of restoration works that was carried out in the early 1900s. What started out as a chapel was eventually abandoned before being turned into the town's jail and then a newsagent in 1888. In 1913, the shop was bought out and closed down with the intention of restoring the bridge back to its original form with the chapel, which they did. The works were completed by 1924, however, it appears that they've missed out half of the original bridge, but it doesn't matter because it's now been replaced. One of Rotherham's largest manufacturers began in 1751 making glass medicine bottles which were exported all over the world. The company, known as Beats & Clark & Co., whilst under new ownership, is still trading today, and they make over 600 million glass containers every year from the same site that was set up all those years ago. Not only do they still make medicine bottles, they've expanded into food and beverage containers, and if you like a beer from a glass bottle, there's a very high chance the bottle was made here. Next up, the town of Swinton, where my guidebook says, see Mexborough. Welcome to Mexborough, a small town of around 15,000 people, both today and in the days of my guidebook. The guidebook only makes one suggestion on things to do whilst we're here, so that means Swinton must be really shit. But in any case, I've come to Castle Hill, where presumably we find a castle and a hill. We do. Well, sort of. It's more of a mound these days because the local council did some landscape gardening, but it is the site of an 11th century Motte and Bailey castle or fort that was built in this location to overlook the River Don and its crossings. If the enemy were coming, they'd be using the river crossings, and the castle would serve as a first response or early warning system, if you will, before launching an attack on any invaders, although who would want to invade Mexborough remains as one of history's great mysteries, a bit like the pyramids. Yeah, probably not actually. Onwards we go, and we'll be picking up the A633, which in terms of route hasn't changed all that much, but the area has. It would have once been littered with coal mines and industry, but today, not so much. It's shiny warehouses and crappy new builds. That's about it. The road brings us through the town of Wombwell, named after the discovery of a well filled with smashed wombs, probably. Despite the town having 15,000 residents, it doesn't get a mention in my guidebook. Back then, the town mostly existed as somewhere for coal miners to live. It wasn't a place for tourism. It's hard to imagine how things would have been back then. These quiet open fields were once home to Wombwell main colliery and a host of railways, but if you weren't told, you'd have absolutely no idea based on what you can see today. The colliery employed around 1,000 people and it opened in 1855, surviving right up until 1969, and now, like all of the other industries in the area, it's been deleted with no trace left. Waste of time coming here, really. However, a short distance away are the remains of some of that railway infrastructure by way of the Ardsley viaduct. It opened in 1899 and sits on what would have been the Midland Railway's Stairfoot to Cudworth line, which at only 2.5 miles long is rather short, and you could say it's vastly over-engineered, with a tunnel and several bridges crossing over roads, railways and canals. However, to the company that built it, it was all worthwhile because it allowed them to get involved with transporting coal, a lucrative business at the time. I don't know if it worked out, but Stairfoot Station closed in 1957 and the line not long after in 1964. Yeah, this is fine. No worries at all. Cudworth Station would close later in 1968, the original station building having survived. Interestingly, the line here lasted until 1988 because it was still in use. However, due to subsidence caused by mines, repeatedly, they decided to close it and remove it rather than pay to constantly repair it. Time to make our way to the final destination on our journey, the beautiful Barnsley. To get there, we'll somehow pick up the A628, which after a short drive will deliver us into Barnsley. However, I couldn't help but notice that as we head into Barnsley, alongside the A628 are the leftovers of some old industry. What's that all about then? Coal. Of course it is. This is the remains of Barnsley Main Colliery, aka Oaks Colliery. It opened in 1833, and there's a sad story attached to the mine here. In 1866, it would become the site of the worst mining disaster in English history, where 361 people lost their lives. Some coal mines emit what's known as fire damp, a flammable gas found in bituminous coal, and it forms in pockets. We've known about it for ages, and it isn't usually that much of a problem. Except that is at Barnsley Main Colliery, where excessive amounts of fire damp accumulates, giving Barnsley Main a reputation as being the most dangerous coal mine in the country. Proved in 1866 when several large pockets of flammable gas ignited underground, leading to a chain reaction of explosions. I suppose this isn't really a piece of leftover industry, it's more a memorial. Anyway, Barnsley, 50,000 strong in the days of my guidebook, and like some of the other towns that we've seen today, it was a mining, glass-making, textile milling industrial giant, but today, not so much. However, here's a surprise. My guidebook suggests maybe we'd like to take a visit to the Cooper Art Gallery. Huh? Culture? In Yorkshire? No. Well, I'm wrong. Here it is. The Cooper Art Gallery started in 1912 by Samuel Cooper, who purchased the building with the intention of providing a free art gallery to the people of Barnsley, but also it was a place for him to display his own artworks. To be fair, it was probably the least that he could do. Sam was a keen industrialist who owned a lot of the coal and iron mines in the area. Unfortunately, he would die in 1913 and never got to see his art gallery open, which it did a year later in 1914, free to all, and that's still the case today. Interesting fact, the first bottle banks for glass recycling were introduced in Barnsley. You'll recall from earlier Beats & Clark making bottles. Well, the whole area was busy with glass manufacturing, so it's no surprise that the first glass recycling initiatives were introduced there. Anyway, to finish, I thought we'd take a look at Wentworth Castle, as recommended by my guidebook. However, the name Wentworth refers to the country estate and manor house. The castle is known as Stainborough Castle. It was built in 1730, and it's interesting because it's a completely fake structure. Well, okay, yeah, it definitely exists, but it's a fake castle ruin or a structure designed to look like a castle ruin. It was never an actual castle. It's simply something somebody with a lot of money decided to build because they could. There were no Norman invasions, civil wars, or centuries of history happening here, so it's a fancy garden ornament. No. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'll be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.